Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Ancient Historia. Today's episode we're going to be focusing a little bit on Photoshop through history. And I know that doesn't sound like something that would have been that historic, but believe it or not, photo editing has actually been taking place since the early 1900s, and in some cases even earlier. We're going to be investigating that now. So before we kick off with those photos, I'm going to quickly go through the brief history of photography and just show you when photo editing first started to really become a thing. Now, this was actually the first photo in the world. So yeah, it was taken in 1826 by this Frenchman, and it was taken using a camera obscura, which is on a tin plate covered with a thin layer of Syrian asphalt. So this photo depicted a view from this guy's workshop window, and it was created within 8 hours, continuously being in direct sunlight. So the first color photo was taken in 1861 using a method first described in 1855. And then the photo itself was actually taken by somebody called Thomas Sutton 6 years after this method had first been suggested. And now we come to the creation of modern photo paper. This event also occupies an important place in the history of photo manipulation. In 1879, J. Swan opened the first production of special gelatin-based halogen silver photo paper, which has become the main element in the production of photo paper and is still used in industrial manufacturing today. This also talks about the founding of the Kodak company. This picture showing Thomas Edison and Eastman, the founder of Kodak. And it talks about after a trip to England, the American banker George Eastman opened his Eastman Dry Plate Company in America in 1880. It was later renamed and registered as Kodak in 1888, starting its long and eventful history of Kodak Company. In 1884, Eastman received a patent for roller film on a paper substrate and cassette, which was a great innovation. After that, in 1888, Eastman received a patent for a portable camera, which housed this roller film. In 1889, the mass production of the film started. In 1948, Polaroid make a breakthrough and launched the Polaroid Land 95, which opens the era of instant photography. And then in 1975, a Kodak engineer designed and introduced the first digital camera to the public. Now we finally get to the point of this video, which is the retouching and first photo editing in history. Today, each of us uses Photoshop or Lightroom to improve almost every image. So what did people do before to change their pictures? The history of photo editing began to develop gradually since the advent of the first cameras. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that this process was quite complicated. It required a lot of time and financial costs. Only the richest photographers could afford to slightly change their images. However, photo equipment was developing and new editing technologies appeared, which became available to more people. And now we come to the world's first photo editing in history. In 1841, William Henry Fox Talbot patented calotype, the first practical photographic process that created a negative that could generate multiple copies. Just 5 years later, in 1846, the first famous example of photo manipulation was documented by Talbot's colleague Calvert Richard Jones. Jones took a photograph of 5 Capuchin monks on the roof of a building in Malta, but while 4 of the monks were gathered in a group, the 5th one was placed a few feet behind them. Jones did not like how this 5th monk destroyed the integrity of the scene and painted over the figure on the negative using Indian ink. In a positive print, the place where the 5th monk stood began to look like a white patch of sky. So this is the negative, whereas you can see that he has painted over this figure with Indian ink. And then when we go to the positive, we can see that he seems to have completely disappeared. Obviously, the image is reversed, so that wall is on this side. So our gentleman must be stood in between the two fellows here. But he's been completely edited out. So that is the first ever instance of photo editing. Over the next 30 years, by 1878, the wet plate collodion process was invented, followed by gelatin silver photo processes. They are one of the most important examples of manipulation in history. Both of these processes used glass negatives at first, which were well suited for manual image retouching. Negatives from the flexible film became popular after 1913 and were also retouched using the same methods. But you can see here how they've changed her face. They've edited that in the post-process. So how was the image retouching process carried out? The process always proceeded according to one scenario, regardless of the type of negative, and was unchanged for a long time in the history of photo manipulation. After exposing the negative in the camera, it was processed with chemicals in the darkroom in order to develop and then fix the resulting image. Some photographers varnished the negative to protect it from damage, while others preferred to retouch the negative first and only then preserve it. Image retouching was carried out on a special table. This is a device with a variable inclination angle of the working surface. The negative was placed on a special frame and shone through from behind using an adjustable mirror or any other reflective surface. Is an example of one of these, an actual photograph of somebody using one of these devices. So meanwhile, the history of photo manipulation is moving to a new level. According to the Manual for Retouchers of 1898, that was a manual for retouchers, the photo editor had to place his or her desk in front of a window facing north because the light on the north side was less changeable. Most of the manipulations were carried out on the negative side, coated with emulsion. The manual also stated that it was necessary to make a test print in order to determine more accurately which parts of the image require correction. And now we'll move on to face retouching. It says, for such detailed work, retouchers used a blade similar to a surgeon's scalpel. This process has been called etching. It was a very delicate procedure. Only experienced retouchers were allowed to do it. Portrait photographers considered etching an invaluable part of perfecting their clients' images. This process took a worthy place in the history of film editing timeline. As soon as the retoucher finished lightening certain areas, he or she proceeded to darken the other ones, using a hard graphite pencil or brush dipped in ink or watercolors. However, first, the picture editor had to prepare the surface of the negative to make it stickier. He or she polished the negative with pumice powder or cuttlefish bone very delicately. Then paint or a special image retouching mixture was used, a liquid based on turpentine mixed with balsam or resin. This method had a great advantage. The dried layer of this mixture could be removed very easily in case of a mistake. So look at the way that they've changed this image here, and they've cut that away. And look at that, now looking much, much better than over here. But you can see, number 1, number 2, number 3, the way that they've decided this is going to be the new chin and where this section of clothing is going to come up. And that's the end result. Now, we don't have an exact year for this, but this just shows what they were capable of. And we're going to move on shortly to the famous historical photos that have had editing. I thought it was important that we saw how it was done before we saw the images that have been retouched. So the first image we're going to look at is of Adolf Hitler from 1937. This image also appears in our history of photo editing, so we'll look at it from here because it provides a much bigger version for us to have a look at. So this is Hitler, and this is Goebbels, his minister of propaganda, and they're meeting with his family. And for some reason, whatever reason is unknown, but for some reason, Goebbels was edited out of the photo. As you can see here, he's gone. And there he is. So that was in 1937. They're very capable at that point to edit people out of images. And it's definitely not the earliest piece of evidence of this happening that we're going to look at. Another view here of that image showing us where he was. Just there. And that's been completely removed. This next image, a very famous image of the Russians raising the flag of the Soviet Union in Berlin. In this image, you can see that somebody's watch on the hand of a soldier here has been edited out of the image. The reason for that is supposedly the watch suggests that looting had taken place before the picture. Which obviously doesn't look too great for the Allies if they're looting Berlin when they're supposed to be there saving everyone. This very famous photo of Winston Churchill, going with the World War II theme, has been edited to remove his cigar because cigars are unhealthy. And as we all know, Winston Churchill is a pillar of health. Believe it or not, Winston Churchill actually had his doctor sign this note so that he was allowed to drink on his visit to Prohibition America. So if you don't know, America at one point banned alcohol, but Mr. Churchill did not have that same rule applied to him. As you can see, Winston Churchill was a notorious alcoholic and was for many, many years. The doctor prescribes or necessitates that the Honourable Winston Churchill has alcohol spirits, especially at meal times, because of an accident that he had. And the quantity is naturally indefinite, but the minimum requirements would be 250 cubic centimetres of alcoholic spirits. This photo shows Leon Trotsky, who was edited out of this photo with Vladimir Lenin after he was denounced as a scoundrel for siding with the opposition. You can see him here. and how he's been removed on this side. But look at that, the way that they've completely removed this guy. Don't piss off the ruler or you'll get edited out of history. Now, this is not the last American president we're going to see today. It says a good portrait of Ulysses S. Grant was a rarity, so this particular image was made up of 3 different Grant photographs. You can see this is the image that's made up of that image, this image, and this image, to create a completely fake picture that never happened. I thought this image might be a teeny bit clearer, but I'm not sure. It might be a bit smaller, but you can see right there, this is him, supposedly at this battle. But in fact, it was made up of these 3 individual images. But yeah, you can see as well here, something has been edited out of this image. Now the next one, Nikolai Yezhov was Joseph Stalin's head of the secret police. What's not secret was his removal from this picture after proving disloyal to the leader of the Soviet Union. He looks more like a child, but he's been removed from this side. He was never there. And Stalin's face also looks like it's been touched up a bit, doesn't it? But that is, once again, somebody being edited out of a photo. This one is absolutely unbelievable. When I first saw this, I couldn't understand why they needed to do it. But this photo is not actually of Abraham Lincoln, because it's John Calhoun's body that they've just stuck his head on. So why have they done that? I'm sure some of you are thinking, this can't be true, but go and look it up. Go and research it for yourself and find out that they did this quite frequently. And it does make you wonder, doesn't it? How many of these images that we know to be real aren't actually. Bogu, senior leader of the Chinese Communist Party, was removed from this image after having a falling out with the founding father of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong. It literally is. If you piss off the leader, he'll cut you out of all the photos. He doesn't care about you, and he will remove you from every picture. You never existed. Now they've just removed this guy and replaced him. Mr. Wannabe Dictator himself, Benito Mussolini's horse handler, was edited out from this photograph to make him appear more striking and independent. This looks like he's charging into battle, and this looks like someone's let him have a go at the zoo. But absolutely incredible, isn't it? That they can edit out people. And you wouldn't have believed that that was possible until you look into it, and then you find that it was quite a common practice. This man with a confusing name was said to be part of the Sochi 6, a group of Soviet cosmonauts who were to explore space. He was removed from the photo after he was dismissed from the program for alcohol-related misconduct. And there he is. This image, I'm kind of confused why it's here because it's not really historic, but it's to do with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and his uncle Jang Song-thaek, who was removed from this picture after he was executed. He was right there, and not anymore, you're not. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister William Leon Mackenzie King removes the real king by removing King George VI in 1939 from this image. So there you go, another evident use of editing people out in 1939. So it does make you wonder how prominent this would have been, this technology, this ability to put people wherever you wanted them. There's a lot of conversations today about AI and deepfaking and how that's going to change the world, but apparently this ability has been around for a long time. It does make you wonder how many historic images have been altered to change the narrative, to change the timeline, and to provide us a different history. This one says that Carlos Franqui was edited out of most photos after he left Cuba and cut ties with Castro and signed a letter condemning the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. This is our bloke here. And he's been removed from the photo here. And this from 1970, from the Kent State Massacre, a fence post was removed from this photo. This fence post right there that looked to be going into the back of this girl's head almost. Very strange scene with people walking around almost confused as to what's going on. And the US Olympic hockey team adds missing players in 1960. So we don't actually have a copy of what the image looked like before, but you can see what looks like this man's head. Looking like it might have been edited in. This guy as well, looking like he might have been edited in. But yeah, so whilst not the most impressive piece of editing we've seen today, it was still being done. And this one, which is the last one, says General Francis P. Blair added to this photo of General Sherman posing with his generals, 1865. So this is one image, and here is the other. So this is General Sherman and his generals, and this is General Francis P. Blair, who wasn't actually in the image. They just added him later. So that was our photo-edited images from history. What did you think about that? Have you seen any other photos that have been edited that you'd like us to take a look at? If so, then please drop a link down in the comments. I'd love to have a look at those sometime. And I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I hope you've learned something. I definitely have learned something a lot about photo editing. I didn't think it was this prominent, but now it just seems to make sense. Thank you to all the Patreons and the supporters of the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do. You can join the Patreon, you can buy me a coffee, you can join the channel memberships. If you do join the Patreon, you can get access to the Discord server, which means you can come and talk to us. And if you'd like to support the channel but you can't, then, just drop a like and a comment. That really helps us in the battle against the algorithms. But again, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Ancient Historia.